Just passed through Washington Square Park, where there is an anti-Trump, anti-Pence rally. And they're making a lot of noise, which proves that there's hope. They're in that bizarre birdcage kind of statue or what sculpture that's inside the arch. And so they're, what's it? Highway, that's right. And they're in there trying to get out or acting like they're trying to get out. And there are three nervous New York City police people standing nearby looking at them, but clearly not knowing exactly what to do.
They're all over the country.
Yes?
Yeah,
All right. Yes, and that was the signs consistent with that also. Okay, so thank you all for coming. I need, as usual, to thank the three entities that make these evenings possible. First, the Judson Memorial Church, in which you are sitting, and the minister, Donna Scapper, who runs this church and who has made it available for these evenings, with the interesting remark that what we do here, she feels, is consistent with the mission of her church, which is about the nicest way you could be part of a church event, at least for us. The second organization is the Left Forum, and you all, I think, or at least most of you know that this is the organization that produces the annual conferences, usually in the spring. And it will again on the, probably almost certainly the 1st to the 3rd of June, 2018 will be the next one. But you might also be interested to know, it normally draws about 4,000, give or take, people. It's the largest collection of activists and academics on the left in the United States and perhaps beyond that as well. For the first time in its 30-odd year history, it decided to have a second Left Forum, this one located in Los Angeles, to enable people at the other side of the United States who cannot come to the Left Forum here, partly because it's expensive to fly across the country and it's expensive to stay in a New York hotel. By the way, if you haven't done that recently, it's a way to get a nice brisk shock by asking what it costs. It's extraordinary. So this last weekend, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of November was the first Left Coast Forum, I believe is they're called. And I spoke at the opening session on Friday in Los Angeles, and it was it was at a technical college in downtown LA. The college very nicely presented a whole host of classrooms. They had over 500 people, which for the first Left Forum is a very good showing in Los Angeles. They've never done that before. In a workshop about worker co-ops that was organized by Alan Schulman, sitting over there, and he was also there. We had a standing room only crowd. Every seat in the room was taken. It was very nice. They had organized everything in a kind of outdoor shed, permanent outdoor shed. You know, it's Los Angeles, so it's warm. They had the flaps that you could lift up so the air could get through. Very nice location, and this technical college, I think it's called Los Angeles Technical College or something like that, was a good host, and the thing came off really very nicely. So we're proud of that, and we're already beginning the planning for next year. And one of the questions will be whether to keep it in Los Angeles or to move it up to the Bay Area, where there's a whole host of people who want to do it in the East Bay, the Berkeley, Oakland, Richmond side of things. And the third organization is Democracy at Work. And that's the organization that produces these programs. So it's a project of all three: the church, Left Forum, and Democracy at Work. And that's who brings this to you, and I want always to thank them, since all of them in their different ways do a lot of work to make this possible. The next is very few announcements, I promise. The next is, as you know, we often thank the folks who sponsor these evenings. If, by the way, you are interested, you just go to our website, democracyatwork.info/sponsor. And there you can learn about that process. It's a way for us, obviously, to raise money, but it's also a way to pay the costs of these events. And I want to recognize tonight's sponsors are Walter and Patricia South of New York City. Walter is here, but I'm not going to point him out so that I don't embarrass him. And he'll come back a little bit later to make an announcement about a course that he's teaching, unconnected to his sponsorship of what we do here. We are looking for more sponsors, so if any of you is presupposed to that, to think about it, please do so. In that regard, let me mention that November 28th is an important date for all nonprofit organizations in the United States, of which there are many. It's called Giving Tuesday, which is the opportunity for people who like or support or want to endorse any particular 501c3, that's the code in the government laws that give you tax exemption as a nonprofit. That's the day to do that. Now, obviously, we are not interested only in one day of the year. We need help all the time. But if you were interested, just go to our website. It's easy there to donate any kind of support that you might like. You can wait until Giving Tuesday, the 28th of November, or you can do it right now, or any time in between or after. It doesn't really matter. It's just that it's a giving day, and so we use it. One of the easiest way to become a supporter is to go to a particular website, which I want to make sure you all know. It's called Patreon. Some of you may know it, Patreon. Patreon.com/economic update. That's the name of the radio and television show that we do every week. And you can see the entire show there, plus extra material that we put up. And you need to make a small donation, but it can be, I think, as little as $3. But it's a way of being supportive if you are so moved. For your information, we now have 800 Patreon supporters, which is for us extraordinary, and it's only been a few months that we've been doing it. And it is an easy way, as I say, to be a supporter if you are so inclined. Finally, one of the growing number of projects that we host on our platforms, in addition to democracyatwork.info, our website, we have a fairly large presence on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can find us on all of those. But we are constantly increasing the kinds of materials we put up on all of these platforms. And I want to alert you to one of them. It's a new podcast called Left Out. Left Out. I hope you see the quadruple entendres and all of that. It is produced by three of the people who work with us, Paul Sliker, Michael Palmieri, and Dante Dalla Valle. The show is creating in-depth programs with today's leading political thinkers, heterodox economists, and organizers on the left. The shows they've already done, one is an in-depth interview with David Harvey, and the other one is an in-depth interview with Michael Hudson. I think many of you will know who these folks are. And the show is available on all the places you normally find podcasts. Simply search out Left Out. And their most recent program you can find again on our website, democracyatwork.info. All right, with all of those announcements behind us, let me turn then to some of the more interesting economic events of the last month since we met. Some of you have asked me how I decide which one of these events. The truth of it is that there are too many. way too many. Partly because I've been looking for them all these years, partly because I'm an economist, so I kind of pay attention to these sorts of things, and partly to educate, teach, inspire, amuse, depress you at these monthly events. That's how I choose these things. So let me start and try to move between the sublime and the ridiculous, which is, we're going to have both of those today. So I'll begin here. I could have begun anywhere, but this one caught my eye, so I had to tell you about it. This has to do with Singapore Airlines. Singapore Airlines, I have never talked about them before. They're a major global airline, and they just made an announcement, and I want to share it with you, lest you might have missed it. Okay. They just invested $850 million in the interiors of their aircraft. You can now fly Singapore Airlines. This is not an ad. They have not paid me anything. So you can now fly on their airplanes, and you can buy not a ticket for a seat, but a ticket for a suite. A suite. And I want to tell you about the suite, but I don't want you to leave until the evening is over before you rush out and get tickets. The suite, I'm now using their language, is more like a hotel room than a seat. And it includes, among its other amenities, double beds. Which, if you think about it, raises extraordinary questions about what you might be disturbed by in the next room during the evening. I can't go further because we're in a church, but other than that, I leave it to your amendment. It turns out, my ignorance, that the airline has been offering double beds in the highest class of service for a decade, beginning in 2007. Quote now from the airline. Our original suites were the first to offer double beds in the sky, and they are still regarded as the ultimate in premium travel, Chief Executive of Singapore Airlines said during the unveiling in Singapore of the latest designs. Not only are we retaining that feature, but now the beds are even more plush and comfortable than before. So in other words, you can fly while reclining or doing whatever else you do in a double bed, but it's plusher than the double bed of the past, okay? And they want you to know that. Flights in the new seats are already for sale. Suites pricing from $6,600 round trip between Singapore and Sydney, Australia. The first route to have the fresh interiors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to bring this to your attention, not really because I thought you'd run out there and buy it, although if you're thinking about it, then I really want you to visit our sponsor page. The reason I'm telling you this is that in capitalism, capitalists go where the money is. And for an airline to spend $850 million to create suites in the sky that cost $6,600 for a trip that isn't actually even that long. If you look on the map, Singapore to Sydney, I mean, it's a trip, but it's not the worst, not the longest by a long shot. Then that's a market that they want to get. And after 10 years of experience, that market is so profitable, it's time to invest even more to make it plusher, so that those for whom plushness, if that's the word, is worth the money. And in our capitalist system, with the inequality in the world today, there's a market for this sort of value. And I just want you to remember that the next time you're traveling to Sydney, Australia, this is a way for you can arrive refreshed. Unless there's turbulence, in which case you are heaved out of the double bed and thrown against the side of the airplane, unless you strap yourself in which can remind you of episodes in a mental institution. But they don't talk about that, so I won't either. Okay, next item. As you probably know, unless you've been sleeping, that the United States is once again showing the world that we have more people ready to kill anybody who isn't already dead than anybody else. We had, since our last meeting, we had the shooting from the hotel in Las Vegas down upon the people at a music concert, if I got it correctly. And then a few days ago, in a little rural part of Texas, half of a church's congregation got blown away. And in both cases, lonely white men, middle-aged, lonely white men, which is the largest consistent pattern of who's doing this. Our president distinguished himself, which, given him, is not so unusual, but he did distinguish himself by making a distinction. In both those cases, he had nothing to say about the relative punishment that the man should get. But when a person who looks unusual did that thing with the truck on the West Side Highway there, the president had him condemned to death within hours. It was a display of the way he sees some parts of the population and not other parts that goes by the name of racism, and there's no other conceivable way to make sense of what he did there, and felt no compunction about doing. So I thought a little economics, since that's what we do, might be of interest to you. According to Politico, which is a good source of all kinds of information, in the 2016 Congress, the pro-gun lobby, the NRA and groups like that, spent about $6 million on congressional races. It broke down as follows: 98% to candidates of the Republican Party, 2% to candidates of the Democratic Party, from which I deduce that someone in the office made a mistake. Otherwise, we would have had what they clearly want. The single largest recipient of money from the gun lobby was a man named Paul Ryan. Think about it. I'm not going to say anything more. I just want you to think about it. President Trump said after the latest thing that guns have nothing to do with this. This is not a gun issue. He had a penetrating analysis of what was going on here, captured in the single word, evil. I thought that was arresting. For a lot of us, we probably thought it was good until he pointed out that it wasn't. It was evil. It was evil. As an analysis in a classroom, F. And you would explain to the person, this is not an analysis, this is a description. Description is nice, but analysis is what we need and want to understand why this happened and how maybe we could do something so it doesn't happen again, especially in a country where it happens all the time. The New York Times since has, like many newspapers, pointed out that no other country on the face of the earth has anything like this number of people killed, this frequency of these events. We are completely without, nowhere, not Russia, not China, not anywhere, whether you do it in terms of the number of people killed or per capita, however you measure it, we are completely unique.
American exceptionalism.
Exactly, American exceptionalism, which, if we were a rational society, would long ago have provoked a national conversation. What's going on here? Now, if you're the president and it's evil, then you'd have to assume that the United States is more evil than other countries. I don't find that a persuasive presumption. I mean, I'm an American, and most of you probably are, and I don't think of myself or you as exceptionally evil. So what's going on here? Maybe we should try to explain how and why we have a population that does this so often. Well, there's a number of reasonable hypotheses. First of all, women apparently never do this. That is, the number of times a woman has done this is so small that it's virtually zero. So there's an interesting phenomena. This seems to be a male event. Most of the time, the people being killed are unknown to the killer. They're not personally involved or engaged in some way. So this isn't that kind of an event. Not that that would be any better, but it's different that way. It tends to be white persons. This is not an activity that folks of color seem to need to do, at least not on a scale that white people do. And it tends to be middle-aged folks, and then it tends to have two interesting qualities. Not 100%, but it's a pattern. These men, A, have recently lost a job or lost their connection to the work world, at least the usual one, the one of the American dream of a nice job and a nice income and a nice spouse and a station wagon and a dog and some children, more or less. Either they lost such an opportunity or they never had one, and they feel deeply disconnected from all of that. And the second thing that most of these men have had is a partner, a romantic or relational partner who has left them. That is, they're psychologically disconnected from a relationship and they are economically disconnected from a living. This seems to not work out real well. And if they have the kind of personal problems everybody has more or less of, these extra pressures, the isolation, you might call it the alienation from work and from relational connections to other people, drives them to feel very much, this is the language the few who have survived have used. They feel very much unmanned. And that will help explain why one of the things that seems to grip a number of them is the massive accumulation of guns and of ammunition. The fellow in Las Vegas, if you saw some of the pictures in his room, he had gathered in the hotel room from which he shot many weapons. They were lying on the floor, huge amounts of ammunition. And one of the reasons he was able to do that is he was a regular at that hotel because his way of earning a living was gambling. He didn't hold a regular job. He was making money, or not, by playing, and everybody knew him. So he could enter the hotel with a gun or a package of ammunition. Nobody noticed it because he was coming and going all the time anyway. The fellow in Texas was all dressed in military outfit with guns on his shoulder and the paramilitary kind. They are in a fantasy of male something. They have acquired the man to offset the unmanned that their job situation and their personal relation situation had undermined. Okay, if this is even vaguely useful, then we have a society that is doing a number on people on a scale that we ought to worry about. Heaven knows, given all of this. But we don't. Or very little. So we have a president who says it's evil, and that's the end.
Well, that and thoughts and prayers.
Yes, prayers. Yes, that's the offering, yes, of, I believe the governor of Texas and various other people were, well, you know, as many religious people have said over the years, nothing works better than prayer. Think about that. Okay, next. A wonderful name for papers, Paradise Papers. Over the last week or two, another firm, not the one a year ago, but another one, got itself hacked. Probably by the same folks who hacked the one Fonseca a year ago. Here's another Caribbean company whose job it is to hide money. And they got caught. Normally this is highly secret. The whole name of the game is for these companies, if you've ever encountered them, and again, if you have, then think about sponsoring the. If you have money to hide, these firms come to you and say, give us your money, because we will do whatever it is that should be done with it. We'll make a lot of money with it for you, but you will be secret. There will be no one will have any record of how this is done. Some of you may have heard years ago about numbered accounts in Switzerland. They used to be famous for having an account, and when you went and set up an account there, you were given a number, and all future interactions between you and the Swiss bank were done by number 1426L. And there would be no record anywhere and no communication that you would have to worry about, neither by letter, by phone, by email, or anything else that would identify you and could be tracked to you, because even if someone saw the number, the Swiss bank would never reveal who was that number, what person was behind. Well, it turns out there are all other kinds of ways of doing it, but when it got hacked, then the secret came out. All this is the last week, so I want to make sure some of you are aware of this by telling you two things. Some of the interesting people who got caught with secret money squirreled away. This is just one firm. There are loads of these firms. This, I believe, is based in in Bermuda or one of those places. There are lots of other places. Cayman Islands, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg. There's lots of places. If any of you want to know, I can help you out how to do that. It's not difficult, by the way, not at all, and easy to do. Why do people do it? Let's begin with that. Basically, there are two reasons. One, they need to hide the money because of something usually quasi-legal or illegal, or if it isn't quasi-legal or illegal, then it really looks bad for you to be seen doing this. So, for example, you're going to love this. The Queen of England, Elizabeth, the Queen of England, is investing money outside of England. She's the Queen of England, and her confidence is to put the money somewhere else where she's not the Queen, which raises all kinds of awkward questions, which is why she was hidden. This way she could invest anywhere in the world, because you can invest from the company in Bermuda anywhere in the world, but no one knows it's you. Now the whole world knows, and the British people are enjoying it about as much as they enjoy the rest of their sad diet. Okay? I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that, but I wrote my doctoral dissertation over 8 weeks in London, and I still haven't recovered from the cuisine. Madonna, one of your favorite singers, maybe, she made use of this company. Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary of Mr. Trump, made use, big time, of this Bono, my apologies to Mr. Bono. He repeatedly gets caught in these sorts of things, and he's a little bad choice of companies to have hidden his money. The other reason, besides hiding it, because it's awkward or it's illegal, obviously if you're in danger that your government somewhere, wherever you are, is going to be looking into or is beginning to look into your affairs because you have done illegal things, you want to get that money out of where your government can get it. If it's your government and it's in your country, then if you put it in one of those banks, the government can come and take it, but they can't go to Bermuda or wherever else it is, and so you have a degree of freedom that you wouldn't otherwise have, security you wouldn't ever otherwise have, and the whole thing's hidden anyway, so your government doesn't even know that you have it. Likewise, if you're stealing money, drug money, if you committed a robbery, whatever, embezzled, this is a way that you can have the money, go somewhere with the money, nobody knows, you can have the money invested in any way you want, it earns a lot of money, it grows, and nobody that you don't want to know has any inkling. So if you have a lot of money, and especially if it's tainted, this is for you. The second big reason is, if it's secret, which is the whole point, and it's hidden, which is the whole point, then the income you earn with that money, you don't have to report to the United States government, which means you don't have to pay taxes on it. So in addition to being hidden, it's a way of escaping your taxes, which is a major reason this is done. Those firms and those banks that do this don't make any report to the United States government. If you have an account at Merrill Lynch here, or any stockbroker, or any bank, and you earn interest, dividends, and capital gains on your account, your institution where you have that account is required to file a document with the IRS how much they paid you. And basically the way you get caught in this country is that the IRS gets a document that John Smith earned $5,000 X way. That better show up on your income tax, because if it doesn't, the computer goes crazy and they come for you with sirens and billy clubs and dogs and bears. It's very unpleasant. But if you're in another place in a hidden account, nobody knows, nobody reports anything, and you can accumulate for years without paying any tax. Typically in Bermuda and places like that, there is a local tax you have to pay, but luckily, just by accident, the tax rate is 0, which is another attractive quality of this game. Wealthy people have been doing this for a very long time. The current estimate, and there are estimates of how much money is in these accounts, numbers in the many trillions of dollars. This is a crucial part of the inequality in the world that has developed, that you all know about, why Oxfam, which I've said to you before, announced this year that the richest, 80 people have as much wealth as the bottom half of the population of the planet, 3.5 billion people. Well, those wealthy people, you can be very sure a major part of them, if not all of them, have these accounts, typically in more than one place, so they spread their risk and spread just in case this sort of hack happens. They haven't got all their money in the hacked firm. You can be sure that Madonna and Ross and the Queen are looking for other places to move their money as quickly as possible. There's an international consortium of investigative journalists. That's actually an organization. They're the key ones who get this information and then spread it. They all spread it through one major German newspaper, the Süddeutsche Zeitung. It's a newspaper in the Munich area, southern part of Germany, and they must have an agreement with them. They give it to them first, they get it first, and then the rest of the world press picks it up. It's a major newspaper. It's like the New York Times of southern Germany. So I just wanted you to see that. Okay. Oh, yes, a couple more things from the Paradise Papers. It's not just about individuals. It's also about corporations. Back in 2000, here's an example. Back in 2013, a big furor erupted around Apple Corporation. That's not the fruit company. It's the one that makes all the computers, large numbers of you have. And as I assume many of you know, there's a kind of a folklore developed about Apple. People who have Apple equipment feel as though they are a bit closer to God than those who aren't. And they don't hold that against the rest of you, but they do look a little askance at your backwardness for not doing as they do. In 2013, Apple got itself into trouble because it turned out that a great deal of Apple activity was based, apparently, in Ireland. Now, you know, no critique of the Irish, but it's a small country, and you might wonder why an enormous enterprise, global in scope like Apple, would pick Ireland. Well, I'm an economist, so I'm going to tell you. Ireland has a lower tax rate for corporations than most other countries in Europe, or for that matter, in the world. But it's not quite as good as Bermuda. But Apple can't do that. It's too big. It would be too easy to kind of track. So they had it in Ireland, and then everybody yelled at them because it was clear what they were doing. They were getting out of paying the taxes they ought to pay in the countries where they do most of their business, who were therefore deprived of that. One of those countries, of course, is you and me. Apple would have paid billions and billions of dollars to Washington if it had paid the same rate as other corporations in this country, who produce in this country, who sell enormous amount in this country, and who are therefore, that's the logic of taxation. If you're making a lot of money in this country by producing and selling, well, then you pay taxes to help pay for all of the public resources you rely on. You know, the roads that carry the trucks, that carry the apple to the store where you buy, that kind of thing. They weren't going to do that. They wanted to have the roads. They wanted to make the money. They didn't want to pay the taxes. This, by the way, passes for normal business activity. You learn how to do that when you get an MBA at a business school. I mean, you could probably figure it out if you didn't get an MBA, but if you didn't have an MBA, the person who did would get the job you didn't get. And therefore, it's important to get an MBA so that you get the job, and the other person who couldn't afford to go to the MBA, even though they're 4 times smarter than you are, doesn't get the job. That's what we call meritocracy. And we believe in that in America in the same, well, I'll leave it. So, what did Apple do? Well, it turns out that they left Ireland. And the idea was, as they apparently let people think, that they were not going to take advantage of this Irish tax dodge. But it turned out that when the Paradise Papers were released, we all discovered where Apple's headquarters went. Jersey. Not Jersey across the Hudson. The island of Jersey, which is where the cow was invented. Jersey is a small island, you know, but roughly between England and the mainland of Europe. It's a place nobody goes to. If they sell a dozen Apple computers there, it would be a big year. It's mostly a rural agricultural island. That's where the amount most of its untaxed offshore cash Apple Computer owns in that island where there are more cows than people, $252 billion. To give you an idea, that's like 1/3 of the defense budget of the United States. It's unbelievable. It's on a little island. Is that because it's wonderful climate? No, it's England. It's cold and it's wet. Sometimes there's sun. Those are important days. And the 11 employees of Apple that sit on the porch there enjoy the sun. To defend itself, Apple was asked, gee, how do you justify this? And they said, we are still the world's largest taxpayer, paying around $35 billion in corporate tax over the past 3 years. Now, in economics, you talk about your taxes on an annual basis. But of course, it's a much larger number if it's for 3 years than for one. This is very clever. It's an MBA you need. This, you can do that. So they actually paid something on the order of $12 billion a year. Well, let's see. The revenue in 2017, this year, the revenue of Apple is expected to be $229 billion. That's their revenue. And their tax is $12 billion. Let me do that again. The revenue is 229, the tax is 12. The operating income, which is where the tax is affected, 61 billion. So they paid 12 and they earned income of 61. If you do the math, that's about 20%. The corporate income tax rate in the United States is 35%. They're not even close. They're barely over half. And that assumes that all of these taxes they say they paid were paid to the United States, which they weren't. They paid to a variety of countries. So in fact, probably somewhere between 10 and 15% is what they are paying out of their income to the United States, which means the federal government here, federal government, either has less money to spend and so has to cut programs, or get more money from the rest of us to make up for what they're not paying, or borrow more money, which increases the deficit, which allows, in the future, us and our children to pay more. So the next time you buy an Apple computer, if you insist on doing that, please be aware that you will make the Channel Islanders happy.
Isn't all that money, that offshore money, not really offshore, it's here in American banks?
Right.
You know,
The offshore money, you can have an account, that's exactly right. You have an account in Bermuda or Liechtenstein, and you can order, because it's your money, your L6243, and you instruct the thing, buy shares of General Motors. You can do that. Where? The New York Stock Exchange. In other words, you, an American, can buy shares in an American company, but because you do it through the account you've established in this hidden way, when the when the dividends are paid, they go to that entity that bought the shares in your name and your number. Nobody reports anything to Uncle Sam. There we are.
What's the penalty?
That's tax if it can be proven it's tax evasion, the penalties are fairly stiff for that.
Aren't there some countries that are doing the same thing in the United States?
Yes, American banks and brokers are very bitter and jealous because there are a lot of fees associated with this. So you do have to pay fees to the Bermuda Bank or to the Paradise or whatever they are. And those fees are lucrative. They charge you when they buy and sell shares for you. They charge you to keep records. They charge you, for whatever they can think of. And you're willing to pay. You're making so much money off of this hidden tax-exempt stuff. You don't care about all that. But banks in America are jealous. They want that. And we have a number of states. South Dakota, I believe, is a leader in this area. Delaware. But other states are getting in on it, are offering special accounts where nobody says nothing to anybody about what's going on in order to do this for foreigners. They may not get Americans to do it because then they have the reporting problem. But foreigners who don't care where they put it as long as it's secret, they can now put money here in the United States because we want to get in on this unethical arrangement that we
Can they
have.
spend the money in the States after he's made money in Liechtenstein? Like, could he buy a $20 million home here?
If it was bought in the name of the entity abroad, I believe so. He can't, if you bring it back and you explicitly bring back the money, then you become subject to the taxation. That's the law. That law was only written, a couple of decades ago that allows you, if you make money abroad, to keep it abroad, and you keep it abroad, then you don't have to pay until you bring it home, as it says.
But the money is
But,
literally here.
but the money can come here, that's right.
You have to purchase it with money that's in a bank here, otherwise you can't make the purchase.
Well, what's typically done by an American who wants to play this game, if you're interested, I can see you are, the interesting thing is you can go here to a local bank and borrow money, and the collateral is the account in the other country. So you can actually get use of your money that way. You don't have to go through elaborate movements. You just borrow against it. As long as you can prove to the bank you have something that is given as collateral, you're home free. Yes, sir?
Manafort was purchasing
Yes,
from his account overseas.
that's right. This is very common. If you have more than 10 or 20 million dollars, speak up, please. If you have more than $20 million, then you do this. Not everybody, but basically you do it. And if you didn't think of doing it, when you take your 20 million and you go to a local bank or stockbroker, they will suggest it to you. They can't suggest an illegal thing, wink, wink, but they will speak to you in such a way that you get the idea pretty quick. That there are things you can do, and they are just inside the legality, or maybe just outside, or maybe if you don't care, well then the moon's the limit here. That's how rich people carry on. If you're very wealthy, you don't want all your wealth in one country. One country can have something happen to it. You know, we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. There was this country, Russia, back in 1917. If you had a lot of money there, you lost it. It drove lots of Russians to leave Russia. They didn't have much left to keep them. Okay, so you don't want to keep your money all in one country. And if you're a very wealthy person in a poor country, you know exactly how precarious that is. So you don't want to keep your money in. So one of the biggest sources of this kind of money are the really wealthy people all over the rest of the world who are being safe. That's why if you walk from here, if you walk across Washington Square Park and you walk up Fifth Avenue for 50 blocks and you look at the apartment houses on either side, you will be struck by the vast number of dark windows. There's nobody there. And if you do this, seriously, and if you do this over and over again, night after night, you will discover that they're dark all the time. There's nobody in there. Why? Because that is a classical investment for people who need to have blocks of money outside wherever they come from. The Middle East, the Far East, Latin America, doesn't matter. European countries too. And they have an investment here. This is a good way to park your money. You pay $5 million for some lovely Fifth Avenue apartment. You hope it goes up in value, which in recent years it has done. So you're making money off your investment, and it's out of the reach of your own government. It's out of the reach of your own people if they should make a revolution and snatch everybody's wealth, which a lot of people who are poor get this idea sometimes. And then there's all kinds of things that happen, which of course we won't discuss. But you can imagine. Well, if you can imagine it, those rich people can imagine it too. And so they take steps. So twice a year, their favorite niece visits New York. That's exactly how it happens. Visits New York with a big wad of money to shop at Bendel's or someplace like that. And she has a lovely time, or the nephew, he has a lovely time, shop really well, live in this lovely apartment, and then go home twice a year for a week. And if you happen to walk up Fifth Avenue that week, the window will actually be lit. They're in there having a party with 3 of their friends who are NYU students. I'm being mean here. I shouldn't. But it is a reality. It is a reality. Here's the other side of that reality to worry some of you. As the United States economy keeps slipping down, those people at a certain point are going to get very nervous about the United States. And then the good news about them coming in, bidding up the price of property all over the place. They don't just buy in New York. They buy in Los Angeles. They buy lovely apartments in San Francisco, in Chicago, you know, Florida, New Orleans, and so forth. But what comes in can also go out. And if those foreigners who have done this were to decide to pull their money out because they're scared, you will see the collapse of property values in this society, the likes of which we have never experienced before, because we've never been in that position. Every time this country makes a move that appears to Muslim people to be anti-Muslim, which is pretty much every day, then people who are very wealthy, and there's plenty of very wealthy Muslims around the world, have to keep thinking about whether this is the right place, the safe place to keep their wealth. And if we go and obliterate North Korea and so on, there's all kinds of people around the world who look at this. And it's not necessarily out of some principled opposition to American policy, although it may be that. It's a much more practical notion. This is a society that is splitting apart, in which the tension and hostility between Republicans and Democrats, between the rest of the people and Republicans and Democrats and all the rest of it, that is suggesting this is not a safe place. Things could go really screwy here, and people will begin to pull that money out, and there's no preparation for this, and there's no protection.
What did they do in 2007?
They worried a lot about it. They worried a lot about it. Of course, there's always the benefit for the United States that the tensions and difficulties in other parts of the world can be even worse, and then you don't keep it here because you're happy about it, but you keep it here because where else are you going to put it? You're not going to take it back to your own country. You know better than that. And put it in Europe. Europe's blowing up. Japan is in a 25-year depression. You're not going to put it there.
Narnia.
What?
Narnia.
Yes, that's right. That's right, if you can find it. Okay, let me turn then to the more major topics for this evening. First, you should be aware, just as a thinking person, that we are in another phase of monopolization. That we were having you're going to read about them, you already have, companies getting together. You know, we used to have 100 drugstore chains in the United States. We basically have 3. Walgreens, Duane Reade's, all the same thing now, and they're about to merge with CVS. So we're going to have, you know, you're going to be able to get your medicine from 3 Amazon, these things, and maybe one other one, and the prices will be arranged by these 3 in the way that monopolies have always done that. And it's happening all over the place, partly because the United States has to compete now on a global level. Big companies around the world can outcompete them, so we have American companies getting together, sometimes only with other Americans, sometimes in mergers with foreign companies. But you're more and more confronting a highly concentrated business community on the one hand, and you as a disorganized, isolated individual. This makes for you getting, this is a technical term now, screwed, okay? You're going to get screwed economically, both as a seller of your labor power, looking for a wage, and as a buyer of the product, looking to pay a price. They're going to get you on both ends. They're going to squeeze your wages and jack up your prices. That's what they're doing now. The only thing holding them back now, since they've been very successful at freezing wages for 30 years in this country now, the only thing holding them back from jacking up the prices is a very simple reality. You, the American people, don't have enough money. And if they raise the prices, you can't buy what they're selling. That's a real problem for them, and they're very upset about it. And well, they're taking steps. They are leaving the American market. They're going to where the growth is, and the growth is not here. The growth is in Asia, above all else, and secondarily in other parts of the world. Asia is where economic growth is happening, led by the People's Republic of China. And so that's where you go to sell. That's where you can raise your prices. The United States is a place where you cannot raise your prices. And the best way to see that is in the mall. And I would recommend to you all, visit the mall, because in a very short time, it won't be there no more. We are closing 6,500 malls this year. Let me do that again. 6,500 malls are closing, and they're only closing for one reason. They can't make it financially. And the impact of this is yet to be felt. It's coming in the years ahead. Bloomberg had a story about it today. If any of you know how to get the Bloomberg Business News Service, it's a really good story with maps of the United States showing where it is. It calls it, I think the word they use, apocalypse. The retail, I believe the title of the story is Retail Apocalypse in the United States. Why? Not only are the stores unable to survive and therefore leaving, and you know that Macy's is terminally ill, Sears is already gone, and others are following. The only big boxy type stores that are surviving are the extreme discount. TJ Maxx is okay, but everything at a higher level than that cannot make it. Finished. Now, why is that bad? It's not just that you can't shop, which is happening. You're going to be left with whatever it is Amazon is going to deliver to you. At whatever price Amazon delivers it to. And if you like the price now, just wait until Amazon is the only way to get it because you can't go to the mall. That's the history of every monopoly. It begins By lowering the price, that wipes out their competitors. Once the competitors are gone, then they're the only seller, and then they make up the money because then the price goes up because you've got no choice. That's how it's been over and over again. So it's on us if we permit it to happen again. It is happening again, and it's a very serious problem. Second dimension. All malls, almost without exception, are heavily leveraged. What that means is the developer, the one who clears the land and who makes the mall and who operates the mall and rents out space to the stores that are in the mall, that's called a developer usually, they borrow the money to do all of that. And the collateral is the mall. The bank gives them the money because they're going to get the rents from all the stores in the mall, which will be enough to cover what they owe to the bank and leave enough for them to get a profit. That's the way this is organized. But if the stores can't function, then they can't pay the rent. And if they can't pay the rent, then the developer cannot pay the bank from whom he borrowed the money, which means that as they go belly up, banks across America are also going to go belly up because they're not going to get paid. How this plays out takes a year or two or three. So we're in the middle of the collapse of the mall. Next year or the year after, we will see, and I will report to you about how this ramifies. In a society there are which no controls on this, no management of this, no planning for any of this. By the way, why are they collapsing? We have more malls per person than any other country on earth. Nobody's close. We are completely mauled in this country. And it was only a matter of time. And when you put together the downturn of 2008, which took away purchasing power from masses of Americans, and you add that Amazon can talk to those Americans by saying, you got no money. You can't afford to buy it in the mall. Buy it from Amazon because we'll give it to you 10%, 20%, 30% less. So Amazon crushes them even more. There's not enough buyers, and they have a new kind of competitor that can't survive. That's why 6,500 are closing, more scheduled to be closing next week. The middle level of retail is done in America.
Isn't that why the business community is now quietly advocating a guaranteed income?
They're beginning.
People would have money to buy their products.
Yep.
Just make up the money.
That would be one way to give everybody a minimum income. You're starting to think like that because, as he says, you want people to be able to buy the stuff because everything is dependent on a mass. Look, for 40, 50 years after World War II, capitalism justified itself in the United States on the grounds we're making a big middle class. See, capitalism is creating a big middle. You remember when everybody in America thinks they're in the middle class. You know, the word middle means you're between two things. We didn't have two things. We just had a middle, right? Oh, yes, we had a few very rich people, you know, basketball players and actresses, and a few very poor people, you know, the ones you step over on the way to come to this meeting, that kind of thing. But the rest of us are all middle class. That's all gone. There's no middle. So capitalism can't justify itself on creating a great middle class. Even our politicians talk about the end of the middle class, and they're going to rescue the middle class. Yeah. They've been rescuing, by the way, really well for 30, 40 years. It keeps needing a rescue because the rescue is no rescue. It's just, again, this technical term, nonsense. Okay? There is no rescue. All right?
Americans have been brainwashed with the two classism.
Yeah. Well, the whole concept of class, that's for another day. Second, I do want to recognize, and I want you to recognize, that here we are on the 8th of November, literally to the day, 100 years ago, there was the Soviet Revolution. And we really shouldn't let that pass without a comment, since it did change the world, certainly changed the 20th century and changed the world. Let's really quickly review why it's important, and then we'll talk about China, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Russia, 1913 to 1917 is World War I for Russia, basically, 14 to 17. Russia is a participant in that war, gets caught up in that war. Russia at that time is the most backward part of Europe. Nobody's even close. They have a literacy rate of about 5%. 95% of the people can't read, can't write. They are an overwhelmingly rural people. They live on very, very poverty in the countryside, small industrial area in the city. And they go through a war in which more Russians die than anybody else. The war, much of the war is fought on Russian soil. It is so devastating that they can't continue. And they basically withdraw from the World War I, sign a treaty with the Germans, basically capitulating. And then the troops, very interesting, the Russian troops start walking back from Western Europe, where they were, because the war is over. And they're walking back to a completely decimated economy that was very poor to begin with. They got nowhere to go, no way to survive, and they arrive in the big cities, and they're confronted by a small but determined revolutionary group, the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, what's the name of it, led by Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, those folks. And they appealed to the returning soldiers not to allow what got them into this disastrous war to continue, to join with them as a party of the very small urban working class, of the little bit of industry that had developed in Russia. And they decided they would make a revolution. Most of the people involved thought that was nuts. Most of the people around Lenin thought that that was nuts. When he came back from exile, because in those days, what the Russian police did when they caught revolutionaries was to exile them. They weren't big on killing them, and they weren't big on imprisoning them. They threw them out. Just like Marx had been thrown out of Germany, so Lenin was in Switzerland, and Trotsky was here in New York for a while. Stalin, I don't know where he went. Those are not their real names. If you're interested, I'll tell you their real names, but those are not their real names. You look like you're interested. Stalin was Jugashvili, Joseph Jugashvili, because he comes from the southern parts of Russia. Trotsky was named Lev Bronstein, was his name, Jewish. Stalin was not Jewish. And Lenin, who wasn't Jewish either, was named Ulyanov, was his real name. But in those days, if you were a political revolutionary, to confuse the police, never all that difficult a task, is assisted by using another name. This befuddles them no end. Just to make a note somewhere that you take a. So they made a revolution. Crazy to think they could do it. They were a tiny political organization, very little support in the countryside, considerable support in the city, but the city is a tiny part of Russia at that time. So they had to make an alliance with a big political party that was active in the countryside called the Socialist Revolutionary Party. And for those of you who don't know it, the Russian Revolution was made by a coalition of two parties. It was not only made by the Bolshevik Party, which was itself a part of the Russian Social Democratic Party. It was the minority part, may have been the majority part, but it was only a part of it. So they make this revolution. And what happens? Well, the Russians go crazy with this revolution by a small group of people in the urban area, in the chaos of war, in a backward country that had just gone through a war. So the country split, basically, into those who were happy to have such a revolution, probably the minority, and those who were not, the majority. People who didn't understand what was going on, or who believed in the old Russian traditions, or who were under the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church, which is a very powerful institution at that time. And they had two armies. They called one the Red Army, I'll leave you to guess which that one was, and the White Army, that was the other one. And they fought a civil war, lasted from about end of 1917 until 1921, something like that. A civil war, bitter civil war, which, to the amazement of everyone, was won by the Red Army. The Red Army defeated the White Army. The Red Army was led by Trotsky, which is why he had such an important role in everything that happened afterwards. And in that civil war, they also suffered two other things. An invasion, a foreign invasion by four countries who went in to put down this revolution. Britain, France, Japan, and the United States of America, who sent 10,000 troops. So I can tell from your faces, so I want to drive the point home. Did the Soviet Union ever land troops in the United States? No. Did the United States ever land troops in the Soviet Union? Yes. Who is entitled to be afraid of whom?
Rick, it's the same as Iran.
Yes, it's the same as many other things. That's why I'm telling you. I want you to understand this. But let me stay with this particular example. So now you have a Russian, by the way, they were driven out. The last troops left in 1922. All right, 1922. So the first 5 years of the revolution, in a poor backward country that was decimated by war, there's now a revolution and a civil war and a foreign invasion. I mean, the country is a complete, utter disaster in 1920. By 1970, 50 years later, 50 years during which they had a very violent collectivization of agriculture that disrupted the society again at the 1930s, and World War II, which was again fought on Russian soil. Despite the collectivization of agriculture and World War II, by 1970, this poor, backward, destroyed economy was the second superpower in the world after the United States. You have to understand that, otherwise you can't make sense of modern economic history, which is why I'm talking to you about it. The Russian achievement from 1920 to 1975 was, at that time, the most successful economic development program in the history of the world. If you want to understand why the Soviet model was interesting to people around the world, there you go. They went from piss poor to a global power despite overwhelming odds in a record short time. Only one country has ever gone further, faster than the Russians. The People's Republic of China. Now, since these are both communist countries, maybe there's something there to think about. Just possibly. China is now the #2 superpower, economically speaking. Maybe in other ways too, but at least economically, by everyone's admission. Where were they 40 years ago? As far back economically as the Russians were in 1913. Now, they didn't have wars in between, I get that. And they had a different strategy. Their strategy was to become the producer of consumer goods first, then capital goods, you know, technical means of production, for the whole world. They became the manufacturing core of the world economy. And their offer and their strategy was simple. We're going to beat the capitalists at their game. We're going to go to the capitalists and say, we will deliver to you better profits, better goods, at lower prices than you can. You got two choices, you Americans, you British, you Italian, you Japanese. You can either join us and we'll share this with you, or you can fight us and we'll defeat you. Amazing arrogance. And the West made its decision. Join them. No fight. That's why you're all wearing Chinese clothes and you're toasting your bread in Chinese toasters and you're about to be dependent on Chinese automobiles. You're already dependent on Chinese auto parts to an enormous extent, and your sneakers and everything else, your computers, is all going to be made in China. And if not in China, well, then in Brazil or India or some other place. And why? Because the American corporations and the British and the French, not so much the Germans, that's another story, the Japanese, they jumped into China and China welcomed them. You can come, we'll provide you with workers way cheaper than anything you pay, and they are disciplined and they're educated and they work really hard, and you don't have to worry about air pollution, and you can't beat this. We just have to convince a couple of you. You'll come over here, you'll make a bundle, and then all the others will realize those who went first are going to outcompete us, so we have to go too. We can't win. The only way we can stay in the United States and compete with all these companies going to China is if we automate here and get the kind of economies from replacing workers with machines here that will give us a fighting chance with the low wages they get away with there. So the last 40 years have had two twin pincers on the American working class. You either lose your job because it goes out of the country, or you lose your job to a robot. And that's where you are. It's not even a future, it's a present. We're about, with Chinese help, to have driverless cars, driverless trucks, millions of people with no job. No planning for it, no nothing.
Is that going to happen in China?
It's going to happen in China, it's going to happen here, that's right. Chinese are busy doing that. But let me explain the Chinese economy before you, because we're going to run out of time otherwise. So the Chinese made an enormous bet, very dangerous. The bet was 30 years ago, we're going to pull this off. We're going to destroy the capitalist competitor in manufacturing in the United States, in Western Europe, in Japan. We're going to bring them over here. We're going to get their technology when we bring them over here, because we insist the Chinese are very good at this. You can't come here unless you partner with a Chinese firm. And the Chinese firm either has to be the majority partner, which is often the case, or it has a minority position, but it gets that technology. And by the way, grabbing the technology, that's the oldest game in the book. The Japanese did that earlier, and we did it as a small nation, as a colony of England. Stealing other people's technology is a capitalist holiday. It's always done. Getting angry now that somebody else is doing it simply shows it's over for you. But there's nothing new about this. So the Chinese made their deal. They were going to industrialize their country. They were going to create hundreds of millions of jobs along the coast so they could export everything. Where? To the United States, Europe, and Japan. It worked. It took China from backward poverty and made them a powerful, rich economy in 30 years. Amazing. The most successful economic development. You want to go from a poor country to a rich country? That's the way to do it. Why? Because we've had two examples, Russia and China.
How did Russia do it?
Russia did it by turning in on itself because it could not do what the Chinese did. To be really fair, you have to realize that the Chinese understood that the Russians had their problems because they did it internally. They couldn't become the seller for the rest of the world. They were isolated. The United States, remember, the revolution is in 1917. The United States does not recognize the Soviet Union until 1934 or 3. All those years, there was no trade allowed. The Russians couldn't sell anything. The Chinese were allowed. It was a different situation. Mr. Henry Kissinger opened up the relationships for all kinds of reasons then. And so the Chinese made this gamble. By the way, it could have failed if the West had gotten its act together and closed the door. That's like Mr. Trump. He wants to close the door. And we all have to tell him, the horses are already out. It's too late, you moron. I'm quoting, it's not me, I'm quoting Mr. Tillerson. Otherwise, I would never venture such a judgment myself. No, he's going to do it now, and that it's too late, that the game is over. That's not going to happen anymore. We're now exporting not anymore manufacturing because we don't have that much left. We're now exporting the services. You already know that. When you call the local gas company because there's something wrong, you hear an accent that is not Brooklyn, right? That accent is thousands of miles away in some telephone center in Bangladesh or someplace else. And the same is happening. Lawyers in this country now have very little work to do. Going to law school is something college students don't do anymore because there are no jobs. All the basic grunt work that lawyers used to do is now being done abroad. Same thing with architecture. All the basic blueprints and stuff, it's all being done in some foreign country where you can pay people who are perfectly skilled and have those skills a fraction of what you pay here. So the Chinese made a gamble, but it paid off. But of course, it can't last. Why? The first shock to the Chinese, 2008, when the Western economies, the capitalist global economies collapse, the Chinese are left literally holding all the stuff they're producing. They can't sell it. Remember how in this country, the way the Chinese were able to sell all the stuff they produced, because they were great at producing it, good quality, cheap, very low wages, but of course they lacked one thing: how to distribute it. It's one thing to produce the cheapest, best toaster, or the cheapest, best underpants, or the cheapest, best socks, but you got to get it to where the American consumer will see, wow, I can pay $2 for a pair of socks instead of 10, and I get pretty much the same socks. They didn't have that. How were the Chinese going to distribute across this big country? Someone came and said, I'll do it. Walmart, that's why Walmart is big. Walmart is the biggest employer in the United States, biggest single employer. It's everywhere, thanks to the People's Republic of China. Because Walmart said to the Chinese, we will distribute your stuff everywhere, and we'll make America come to Walmart to get it. So the Chinese and Walmart rose to the top. In Walmart, at Christmas time, they will be playing the Red Army song. Not really, but they should. They really ought to, because that's how it was done. But the problem for the Chinese was in 2008, Americans can't, and the Europeans can't, and the Japanese, who've been in a 25-year depression, can't. So the Chinese confronted a fundamental dilemma. How are we going to grow? And the Chinese have to grow because they're under a pressure you cannot imagine. This is the largest country by population in the world. They have 1.2, I think, billion, maybe more, 1.3 billion people. Now, most of them used to be an agriculture poor country, and a vast number, the greatest human migration in the history of the world, has taken place inside China as a mass of rural people moved into the industrial centers, particularly Guangdong province and the whole coastal area from Beijing in the north to Hong Kong in the south. Hundreds of millions of people leaving an agriculture to which they cannot return, coming to the city to get a job. The minute the People's Republic of China has trouble giving them a job, that regime collapses. It's as blunt and sharp as that. If you think the election results in Virginia and New Jersey last night or the night before are a sign of switching, imagine if 25% unemployment had hit those two states in the last year and a half. Then the Republicans, would have had 5% of the vote. Not the bad showing that they did, but really much worse. The Chinese have to keep those people working, but they couldn't to sell to the rest of the world because the rest of the world, being capitalist crash, couldn't buy it.
One belt, one world. They're doing it all over the world.
Right. They made two decisions how to get out of this jam. Number one, they're going to raise the standard of living, the incomes of the mass of the Chinese people, so that they can begin to be a society that produces a mass of consumer goods for its own people, which is to do in China what the United States did basically in the 20th century. Wages in China have gone way up. In the last 40 years, wages in the United States are stagnant. Wages in China quintupled. Do you understand? Think about it. Wages of workers in China have gone, and now they started very low. The Chinese workers are low-income situation. But in terms of what's going on in the minds of Chinese people's heads as their wages go up, in order that they can then buy what the Chinese economy is ready to produce, you have a massive transformation, which the whole world is looking at, with one exception. You, who need me to tell you about it, because it isn't part of what you get in the diet of your TV and radio. And that's no accident either. And the second thing is the road. This project of the leader of China to basically build a whole new network of countries and products and trading routes from China all the way to Europe, which is a big project, heaven knows, and will bring vast numbers of people into the 21st century who have been marginalized until now, at least for several more centuries. Which means the standard of living of Chinese workers is moving up very fast and is going to overtake, oh my goodness, what will that mean? How will Americans deal with that when they can't afford a car that their Chinese worker counterparts can? Maybe offering them, I don't know, a ride every now and then, just to get the feel of it. What is happening to the image of white people when a non-white country demonstrates this capacity? If you're not aware now that the Chinese already are producing many more patents and scientific discoveries that they're registering than the United States year after year. You can't keep doing this for many years without the results. The Chinese are using their monetary system, their loan system, to do something Americans have never imagined. They don't wait to build housing until you have a vast mass of people crowding into a city, creating the usual slums where poor people have lived for the last 1,000 years. They build the cities in advance. So if you go all over China, you will now see entire cities where there isn't anybody yet. But that's not some mistake. That's in order to create millions of jobs, making those cities, building them and outfitting the apartments to which the people, as the wages rise, will be able to move and pay for it. It's a strategic idea of how to develop. Is there a guarantee it's going to succeed? No, there never is. But it is the most remarkable experiment in economic growth and development that we have in the world. The American pretense that nothing is going on there, that you can dismiss all of this with some casual put down, that's just stupid. That's just backward, stupid. I'm not going to look at it, and therefore it's not there. You have to be at least 5 years old to discover you can put your hand in front of your face, still there. It's very hard for the, yeah, making America great again is a massive program of pretense. It cannot succeed. I mean, for a while, sure, it's a lovely fantasy, going back to the good old days, great again. But you know, the world doesn't stop because you have a fantasy that it could be and will be better. The Chinese thing may not work. Be careful. It's very difficult to take an economy built on manufacture for export and make an economy that is built on developing its own internal. That took in the West hundreds of years to accomplish. The idea, which they have, that they can do it in a couple of decades. Maybe. By now you have to have a lot of respect for the Chinese, because things they said they were going to do that nobody believed they could, they did. So now you have to slow down and being critical because, whoa, they did it. There was a wonderful story. I don't have the time to do it for you, but let me tell you. The Washington Post on October 24th carried a story about the gap between what the West said the Chinese could achieve and what the Chinese promised they would achieve over at least 30 years. And they do it, the homework here very nicely. This was when the Chinese said in 1980 they would do this. Everybody said, oh, that's silly, and you can't do it. They did it. Then in 1992, they said they would do this, and everybody said no. And they quote The Economist and the Wall Street Journal mocking what they would do. By now, it doesn't work anymore. All right, last thing, then we have to stop. Last thing. An attack by the United States on North Korea is a direct confrontation with China. No mistake can be made, no illusions can be held. North Korea is an ally of China and has been since the war in Korea that split the country into North and South back in 1950-51. The saber rattling may just be that, and may Mr. Trump's bluster and all the rest. On the other hand, wars have started when people did this kind of thing in the past, and it could happen again. I want to remind you, I mentioned it last time, but I really have to say it again. Mr. Trump went to the United Nations a couple of months ago. He gave only one speech. The United Nations, for all of you to remember, is an organization built immediately at the end of World War II under the impact of the fact that that was an unbelievably destructive war. And at the very end of the war, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on the Japanese. We are the only country that has ever dropped atomic weapons on anybody else. No other country has ever done that. That's a distinctive American achievement. You might think that the president of the only country that has done it wouldn't choose to go to an institution devoted and built on the premise that disputes between countries should be resolved non-violently and basically threaten to nuclear obliterate another country with whom the United States has a disagreement. It was a choice that is quintessentially Trumpian. But even when you allow for that, you have to really kind of shake your head at the sheer delusional idea of what's appropriate to do. Many people around the world are convinced, we don't hear it much here in the United States, but many people in the world are convinced that the United States now is, more than ever before, a quote-unquote rogue nation. Number 2, that it is the biggest threat to world peace in the world today, and that the fundamental cause of this situation is a declining economic situation, a declining economic footprint in the world. That is, the United States is less of a dominant player than it once was, and that this country is wrapped up in the painful, slow recognition that its economic position is shrinking, its political influence in the world shrinking too, and the one thing it has that is still overwhelming is the military.
All the parts are made in China.
The parts are made in China, but the finished weapon is here. And the world is very nervous about what it might mean. And so the rumors spread, particularly in Europe now, that if Mr. Trump were to give an order that had war in it, that the American military wouldn't do it. Now, the very fact that this kind of a story circulates means usually that that the American military would not basically follow orders. At that point, the government dissolves. For those of you who don't understand this, if you've never gone through it, this is like the police captain telling to all the cops, "Oh, go over there and beat those people," and the cops saying, not going to do it. At which point, the police captain becomes a silly old man with a beer belly and nothing else, and not anymore the scary character that he once was. Americans don't think these things are ever going to happen here. Those are only things that happen in other countries that you read about long after it's over. We are in really dangerous area, and I don't mean to end it facetiously tonight. And we do have one announcement from Walter in the back there before we stop. But I did want to suggest to you that you do live in an economic system that is experiencing extraordinary stresses. If you feel stressed, it's not you. If you want to go and pop a pill to feel better or something, okay, but it ain't the pills and it's not your chemistry that's the problem. It's not your body, it's not your mind. You are living through very difficult times. And if I hope for anything now, it's that instead of you having to go through a long period of suffering and then figure out that you were living in stress times, I want to be here to tell you you're already in them. And the question how they work out, whether they help you or hurt you or take you down with them, really depends on whether you all do something. You know, Democracy at Work, our group tries to get people mobilized. We now have 19 groups around the United States. When I went to Los Angeles to open the Left Forum this last weekend, I spent a good bit of time with the Los Angeles Democracy at Work group, meeting with them in a local restaurant and so on, to help them mobilize and get clear about what they can do. But that's the next step. If the things you heard tonight are interesting, get you thinking, make you want to make change, please do it. Get involved, make the things get better. They're not going to get better by themselves. The people in charge now are not going to do it. I imagine most of you were pleased to hear that the Republicans lost in New Jersey and Virginia and so forth, and the Democrats won. I understand that, I share it. But please remember, the Democrats did those things that led people to vote for Mr. Trump and for the Republicans. As long as we are stuck in a choice between these two parties, we are going to have this absurd oscillation back and forth while the situation deteriorates. That's why you've got to do something. Walter, make your announcement.
We had a choice with that constitutional
Convention that was defeated.
killed
Yep.
everybody.
Some of you may know I'm in graduate school in Dublin, and part of my program, I'm teaching a course here in New York on how to create affordable housing, perpetual affordable housing. And it'll be on the second Thursday of the month, starting January, February, March, and April. It'll be from 6:30 to 8, and you're welcome to come for free. You can also take it on Skype if you want for $100. That's it. I have some leaflets in the back. I'll be glad to hand you. You can get hold of me at South, S-O-U-T-H, at nyc.rr.com, or you can go on the internet with GCAS.
Okay, folks, thank you very much.